Welcome to Greyfriars TV. My name is Martin Haley and I'm joined by Sam Brown. And today is the last in our series of 5 episodes looking at purpose. And today's subject is purpose in neighbourhoods.
Yes, it is. So we've thought about work and family and friends and interests. And the final one that we're going to be exploring purpose in is our neighbourhoods, so the places that we live.
And if you've watched the other videos, you'll see that quite a lot of what we've talked about already will become neatly wrapped up in neighbourhoods. So some of the things that we've already talked about, friendships, interests, etc., really do come together in the neighbourhood situation, so to speak, with some added things that we're going to talk about. But before we have our Bible reading and video, Sam, could you pray for us, please?
Yeah. Heavenly Father, I ask that now as we consider our neighbourhoods and our neighbours, how we can have purpose there. Whatever we think of them, whether we know them or not, help us realise how you care about these places and these relationships. Amen.
Amen.
Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbour as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments.
Do you know the names of your neighbours? I remember moving into my house a couple of years ago, and amongst all the craziness of the moving process, our neighbours on both sides introduced themselves to us. And it was really nice, but the more I thought about it, the more I thought about the opportunity it presented. We have a low wall in our back garden between our house and one of our neighbours. So low, in fact, that we can see each other when we're in our kitchens. And when we moved in, I think I looked at it and thought, that's quite annoying. But it's proven to be a real blessing. It's led to regular chats with the couple living there, learning more about who they are and about their young son and their pug, of course. It also leads to my personal favourite interaction, where myself and the dad nod to each other every evening while we're doing the washing up at the same time. It's also a really easy and natural place to talk faith. Since they learned we follow Jesus, they come to us with questions or tales of their niece's christening that they just attended. This relationship, and others with those around us, feels really purposeful. Not that I'm about to imminently convert them to Christ, but more that when I see them on the street or over the wall, I'm not feeling like my privacy is being invaded, but instead that I'm being invited by God to be faithful there in those interactions. When Jeremiah writes to the exiles, he encourages them to seek the shalom of the places they are. If the city becomes a place where all people are able to flourish, the exiles themselves will prosper. He's telling them, in effect, to be good neighbours, be courteous, be generous. We may also be familiar with Jesus' greatest commands. He tells us to love the Lord our God, firstly, and then instructs us to love our neighbours as we love ourselves. Be a good neighbour. Being a good neighbour isn't something unique to Christians, but doing it with the mindset of one who knows that they are working deliberately and purposefully for shalom on their street is different. Asking how they're doing, being friendly, and finding small ways to help or bless them. Trying to remember their kids' names, offering them parking permits when they've run out, offering to shop for them when they are unwell. The kind of stuff that most neighbours would want to do for each other, but with a heavenly purpose that knows these actions are somehow, some way, working towards the restoration of creation. If God's in the business of restoration, so am I.
So, loving your neighbour as yourself. I do. This probably won't be the first time you've heard this, but I do often wonder whether that passage is there because we're actually better at loving neighbours than we are loving ourselves. But that's a subject, a debate for another time.
Yeah.
Because here we're very much talking about love for our neighbours. And of course there will be some of our neighbours who it's probably much easier to love than others. In the studies that have gone along this week, there have been some lovely stories, particularly one of an older lady who befriended a younger chap who was a drug addict, and through walking their dogs together, that friendship blossomed. The life of the young man was restored through the work of this older lady walking their dogs together. That was a lovely story. I really, really liked.
Yeah. So we're being a little bit cheeky, I think, when we use this passage today about loving your neighbour. And the reason for that is because, Jesus offers us this passage, and of course what it means is everyone who we will find ourselves next to. Now, the specific context that Jesus is speaking into, people are very much contained into their local places, wherever it is that they live. They haven't got the ability to go and travel vast distances at a quick pace, and so as a result, you could just use the word neighbour because that was kind of everyone that you encountered.
Yes.
But today, everyone that you and I and you encounter won't necessarily be someone that you will call a neighbour. But that's okay, because we can read the passage and we interpret that into our modern day context. But we're kind of almost taking its interpretation back to how it was initially meant, to explore Jesus' commands to love the Lord, our God, and to love our neighbours as ourselves. So that's kind of, we're being a little bit cheeky with that. These places where we live are so important, and I think we can't talk about purpose and not consider just the time that we spend around there when we're going for a walk in the evening, and we're going to the shops, when we see them and their families coming and going. And I wonder if there's something generational about this. So people maybe of your generation, I would say, would be more likely to know their neighbours and be familiar with them than necessarily I think people in my generation would be. It's not true in every sense. I still know my neighbours, which is great. But I do think there is something generational about it, where maybe in the past you'd have been more familiar with who you were living next to, and today, maybe particularly as people rent and they move houses maybe more often than they used to, there's less of the same people staying in the same place for an amount of time. But if anything, I think that makes it even more important for people in my generation to take the example of people from maybe your generation of being actually intentional and deliberate in trying to have these conversations with people that we live around, which isn't as easy for everyone because not everyone is an extrovert and not everyone's always up for those conversations. But I think what I've found is our neighbours are just really friendly. So when we see them when we're out and about, they always want to chat. And I take it as my kind of heavenly divine purpose to actually participate in that discussion and not be looking for the first opportunity I have to get out of it and get home with my bag of shopping, but actually be there and listen and ask questions and about how's your lad doing and how's your dog and how's work and whatever else, show an interest in their lives, because the opportunity to talk about Jesus will come back to me. I know that, but it's only going to come back to me, and I think it'll be more effective when it comes back to me if I've done the kind of hard yards in showing that I'm interested in who they are as a person as well.
Sure, and that's something that very much comes out of intentional friendship and relationship building. And you use the word extrovert, which I found interesting because I'm an introvert, but I love talking to people and finding out about them, what makes them tick, and what their passions are. And things. So I'm wondering if there's anything we could do to help people who perhaps would feel awkward about approaching their neighbour or being intentional about their developing some sort of relationship with their neighbour.
I guess you just got to try and find that opportunity and find that point of common connection.
Right.
So do they own a dog? Is it even just a passing comment about the weather? And my point is not for you to go away from this, from watching this and then be like, right, I need to go immediately round to my neighbour's house and knock on the door and start a conversation. What I am saying is be attentive and be ready and recognise that when you're in that place and you're having that conversation, it's not a kind of random thing that God isn't interested in at all, because God is really interested in you being in that place, having that conversation with that person at that time. And
I'd say as well, in my experience, the vast majority of people who you may approach who are effectively a stranger up until that point are very receptive. Yeah. Very receptive to it. Yeah. Very receptive. They're sort of kind of pleased that someone has made the effort.
I remember back in the lockdown times as well, in the COVID times, I really got to know my neighbours during that time. I couldn't really go anywhere else. And so you just kind of ended up chatting to the people who were living next to you kind of through the garden fence, as it were. And actually, on one day during the lockdown, a storm blew through and blew a fence panel down, which then made conversation even easier. Yeah, right. So that was nice. I did think at the time maybe this was God's way of being like, I'm gonna literally break these barriers down, so you can have a better conversation with your neighbour. But that was really fun, and I actually found that. So they had a small child, and there would be no shortage of kind of balls that would come flying over our fence. But I really appreciated it, and I relished it, because every time I got to go and pick the ball up to go and take it back, or that was another conversation, and that was another opportunity to, show that I'm interested in them as well. And I guess the thing that was easier for me was that I worked for a church at the time, so when they asked me, how's your work going, I could say, well, still carrying on because I'm looking for a church, and that led to good conversations. And maybe for you it's a little bit harder then to think about ways to creatively bring up what you're up to. Maybe if you're asked what you're up to of an evening or what you're going to be up to at the weekend, say you're going to church, and so you're going to be there in that space with those people, or if people are coming over, say, they're friends from our Bible study group or something like that. There's loads of different ways that you can start to, it feels like you're kind of covertly introducing faith into the conversation. And maybe they're completely lukewarm to it and they're not interested in, if that's the case, then so be it. You can't force them to be interested. But I think often, as you say, they can be receptive. People are often up for a chat, and they're also often up for talking about, you're a Christian, that's different. I have some questions.
Absolutely, yeah. You mentioned about... while we're living through the pandemic, for us on our road, we formed a WhatsApp group.
Oh, you had one of those WhatsApp group chats,
which is still alive, and it is the most amazing group. And a lot of it is, we're chucking out this. Does anyone want it? Or has anyone got this? I need this. But also some of the stories that came through it were. It's quite tragic stories that were shared about things that happened to people on the road, and so the sense of community that has grown up around that has been amazing. I mean, there's a good sense of community anyway, but the road's quite long, and it's helped us sort of get to know people who live perhaps more at the extremities. But I think that's been great. The way that has happened, and the sort of the love and support that has been communicated through that has been amazing, actually.
Good.
So moving on from that, how does the thought of talking to your neighbour sit with you? Do you feel actually quite positive about the idea, or oh my goodness, I'm filled of dread? What are they going to think of me?
Yeah, I think I'm often now kind of like up for it. But this is I was thinking about this and dwelling on it. I think a massive part of the discipleship process is a reordering of your desires, if that makes sense. And that's in all areas of your life. But one area is how I react instinctively to a conversation with my neighbour. Because I think inherently I would be someone who would react to those conversations with a neighbour in a kind of like, whoa, this is kind of awkward. I don't really want to do this for too long, so let's just do the absolute bare minimum and then get out. But now, I think I'm trying to think differently, and I'm trying to, again, this is all a discipline. The more we try this, the easier it becomes. I'm trying to really not react like that, and I'm trying to react instead in a way that's kind of hopeful and like, this is good. This is a good opportunity. And again, not an opportunity to necessarily convert them there and then on the spot, but an opportunity to witness Christ to them. In my conversation, in my actions on the road, and we suggest some ideas in the video. Handed out parking permits. I think that church WhatsApp group or the road WhatsApp group, excuse me, is a really good way of doing that as well. So it's about combining that all together into a way which says, whereas before I may have dreaded this or found this kind of awkward, and maybe this is more for my generation than your generation, actually now I'm going to get away from that and instead focus on the fact that I think God cares about me, having this conversation with this person and investing in this relationship with my neighbour.
I mean, let's put this in context as well, that sometimes the journey for our neighbours to come to faith can be incredibly long, and we could be a small part in that chain. But the intention is to show God's love to them in whatever that may look like. For them. So in the parable of the Good Samaritan, there's no mention at all of faith. It's purely an example of setting aside prejudice to support another human being. And that's incredibly powerful for us as well, and something that with our unconscious bias may be playing a part in our minds as well. And having the opportunity to, as you say, in light of that, act towards people in a way that just communicates like complete love and acceptance, because we know that this is the love that God first showed us. I think that's crucial as well when we have this conversation and we think about those relationships. We're acting there as messengers of God's love, and we're acting as messengers of God's love because we have first received it. And so when we're doing that, this is what I mean. I'm trying to reorder that desire in my head. So instead of being like, not you, not this, now I'm thinking, oh, you, this. And for me, that's been really important. And for you guys, as you watch this, you'll have different ideas of what it means to have purpose in your neighbourhood with your neighbours. So it doesn't matter if it's not the same for you. If actually you know your neighbours and you got on with them really well, you're clearly way further down the line than I am. You're probably closer to where Martin is, and that's all right. So keep going and keep investing and listen to what Martin says and take it to heart. But if you're not, and maybe you're more like me, recognise that that's where it starts. It starts with that reordering of priorities and maybe kind of projecting what my generation would think about neighbourly relationships. I mean, for me, food has proven to be an incredibly powerful tool. So I talked in an earlier session about how my wife is a brilliant cook, and she would make meals or make cakes for people who were new to the road, and that spurred on some amazing friendships with neighbours that we've got.
We gave away quite a lot of wedding cake to our neighbours, which proved I think that's a really good example of like just a simple thing that you can do that starts making a difference straight away.
So the reading, loving our neighbours as ourselves, I take from that it's not people who are like us. So if our neighbours are people of different ages or backgrounds or ethnicity, how might we handle that?
So that is you're completely right when you say Jesus offers this command, not in the spirit of this is going to be easy for you. There's an acknowledgement, I think, in the command itself that this is harder to do. It'd be easy to love our neighbour as ourselves if everybody was like us and acted like us, but they're not. And actually now we're dealing with people who come from different belief systems, different countries in our globalised society, and particularly in a community as diverse as Reading. We have neighbours on one side of us, a family from Pakistan, and it's great to be able to interact with them, and around time as well of kind of like a Ramadan for them and Christmas, Easter for us. Little cards and messages and treats going back and forth between us. There's a real healthy amount of respect there. And for me, that is absolutely loving my neighbour as myself. So we've got the people on one side who maybe kind of look more like us, and people on the other side who maybe kind of look less like us. And so I think I have to be deliberate and intentional in thinking, am I treating these people the same way I would treat these people? Is there a disconnect there? I don't know. But I've really enjoyed it. I really like having neighbours from Pakistan and having conversations about them with, for whatever's happening in the country. I remember actually around the time we moved in, there was the really, really awful flooding in Pakistan where it was something crazy, like half of the country was underwater. And the dad actually went back to Pakistan for a while, I think, to help out family and stuff like that. And so being able to chat to them about that and kind of talk about, how is that difficult, what's going on over there, was great actually. And often communicating through the children, which is even lovelier as well actually, because the parents' English is getting there, but it's not so good. So they use the children as translators. Yeah. So it's really nice to actually get to know the kids as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. Oh,
yeah,
that's great.
it is.
That's great. For me, in this sort of thing, a lesson has been just try not to be anxious if the person you're talking to is quite different to you. So again, for example, in the study, there was the old lady and the young lad who was a drug addict. I wouldn't know how to talk to a young person who was a drug addict, but I would try and demonstrate love to them and put my anxiety aside. And I think the trusting God in that is incredibly important. Obviously being wise at the same time, but I think so often prejudice arrives through anxiety and fear of kind of not knowing or not understanding, and that can be dissipated by seeking to understand. And as well finding what the point of common connection then is. So in the story from the devotional, when you say, I don't know how I would talk to a young man who is a drug addict, I think probably the woman in the devotional probably didn't know how she would talk to a young man who was a drug addict either. They're both walking their dogs together.
But they're both walking their dogs together. She knows how to walk her dog. She can do that. And so that's why, the thought of just going in like that is probably scary for most of us. But if we know that there is a common, we just did the interest week, didn't we? If we know that there's a common interest there, that's the place to start. It's about finding that which we have in common. So for me, with my Pakistani neighbours, I think it was literally just as simple as, we both have families that we care about, and theirs are facing a really serious ecological disaster back in their home country. And it's from that position that we were then able to start communicating and talking about, and how are they doing and what kind of effect is this going to have on them and how badly have they been affected or people they know, stuff like this. So I think that was really helpful for me certainly, and for you as you think about who's around you, what is the point of connection. Find it, and then once you find it, really invest in it and show interest in it. And
where it is a situation like you're describing, Sam, with the floods, which is obviously quite anxiety provoking for them. I've on numerous occasions used the phrase, I'll remember you and your family in my prayers.
Yes, that's good.
Which I really like, because it is it's demonstrating a sense of love and a sense of spirituality at the same time. Earlier in the series we were talking about this verse from Jeremiah 29 verse 7 about seeking peace and prosperity in the city you have been exiled to. And I think there's very much a parallel here with loving our neighbours, and through the work that we do, we will be seeking for our neighbours to be better, to be more loved, and to in their hearts have peace and prosperity, so to speak, from that.
I'm sure for you there are ways that you can work for the peace and the prosperity of your road. And I don't know what that looks like, if that looks like picking up litter when you see it, or if it looks like reporting antisocial behaviour even. I think there's absolutely things that you can do, and as you work for the peace and prosperity of your road, know that you're not obviously just doing it for yourself, but you're doing it for the people who live there. And when you're doing that, you're absolutely on purpose. You are living in line with what God had for you when He led you to that house or flat that you currently live in. It's absolutely on His heart for you to be involved in that kind of work where you're saying, I've got my own interests and my own ambitions and stuff like that, but actually I'm going to take time out of my day to try and work for peace and prosperity here on this road.
I mean, helping resolve conflicts between neighbours can be part of that.
Being an intermediary. Absolutely right.
Okay, so as we come to wrap up, we're going to have a time of prayer.
Yes.
Perhaps, Sam, if you could just explain the way we've been doing prayer as part of this series.
So in this series, we've been praying in the way that my youth leader taught me to pray when I was a teenager, because sometimes it's hard to think of the right words, and actually that's not, like, God can hear us in loads of different ways. And so the way that my youth leader Rob taught me to pray was, just picture in your mind the way that something is right now. And it might not be the way that you want it to be, that's okay. But then picture how you want it to be. And then imagine that process of change. So we're thinking about people, we're thinking about places, we're thinking about emotions, facial expressions, whatever, and we're seeing it all change into what we want it to be. And as we do that, God hears our prayer.
Okay, so let's really take that on board, and as Sam said, picture how we want our neighbours to be, or how I want our neighbourhoods to be, how we want our relationships with our neighbours to be. So let's pray. So in this moment of quiet, shut your eyes and imagine a situation in your neighbourhood, in your head, that you want to pray for. Imagine the situation as it is now. People, faces, activities, roads, parks, schools, bus stops. Now think about how you want it to be. How do the things change? And what's happening on people's faces? What are they feeling? No words, just imagine that picture. God is seeing and hearing your prayer for your neighbourhood. And as we close, we say together, Lord, in your mercy, hear our prayers. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed this series. We don't know what's next. We may be back. We may not. Let's see. But Sam, it's been great working with you.
Yeah, likewise.
And really have enjoyed this. So for now, it's goodbye from me.
Goodbye.